When we talk about looking at a blueprint or like an architectural schematic, there is this expectation of mathematical precision. It is, clean.
Right. It's very orderly. Everything makes sense on the page.
Exactly. You look at the blueprint for a suspension bridge and the lines are perfectly straight. The structural loads are calculated down to the ounce.
Yeah, the math is absolute.
Right. And the engineer can point to the paper and say with absolute certainty, like, if we build this according to these exact specifications, it will hold exactly this much weight.
It'll withstand this much wind, last for this many decades.
Yeah. It is comforting because we like things to be clearly defined, we like perfect categories. But then you step out of the engineering office and into the real world.
Which is always a bit messier.
Way messier. Imagine that when the construction crew actually goes out to build that bridge over the river, they use reinforced aerospace-grade titanium on the right side of the bridge,
Okay.
but they use rusted, hollowed-out scrap metal on the left side.
Oh, wow. Well, the structural integrity on paper would be completely detached from the physical reality on the water then.
Exactly. The schematic hasn't changed at all, but the lived experience of driving over that bridge, it would be terrifying.
Because it's completely unstable.
Mhm.
The reality of the bridge is fundamentally compromised.
Right, it is going to collapse on one side. And if you just sat in an office looking at the paperwork and the signed inspection forms, you would have absolutely no idea why it failed.
You'd be completely blind to the actual problem.
Totally. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a system that you, especially if you love to learn and dig into how society actually operates, probably assume has a fixed, reliable, almost mathematical meaning.
A blueprint that we all just inherently trust.
Right. We are talking about the phrase equal protection under the law.
Yeah, I mean, it is a phrase baked into our cultural DNA, really. We hear it in middle school civics.
We see it chiseled into the marble facades of courthouses everywhere.
Exactly. And we treat it as the absolute foundation of the legal system. We assume equal protection is the titanium.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's dive is going to completely challenge that fundamental assumption in a way that might alter how you view the entire legal landscape.
It really shifts your perspective.
Does. Our mission today is to explore a truly fascinating, incredibly detailed essay titled The Whole Machine, Equal Protection and the Inequality of Justice.
And we should note, we are not just looking at this author's theory in a vacuum, right?
No, not at all. We are layering it with a massive stack of supporting research. We are pulling from the Legal Information Institute, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, the Vera Institute of Justice.
The Bureau of Justice Statistics, the American Bar Association.
Right, plus the Brennan Center for Justice and the National Bureau of Economic Research. It is a lot of data.
What's fascinating here is how synthesizing all these different data points, like the economic data, the sentencing data, the public defense workloads, it all points toward the same incredibly uncomfortable reality.
Yeah, they all reveal how our system actually functions on the ground, completely regardless of what the constitutional blueprint says.
Right. The core premise of the author's argument is that American criminal justice makes a devastating structural mistake.
Right, it confuses minimum representation with actual equal protection.
Exactly. And minimum representation basically just means having a lawyer's name on a file and a docket number assigned to you. It confuses the perfect blueprint with the rusted metal.
Yeah. And before we get into the heavy mechanics of this, I want to set the tone for you listening. What's great about this data is that it strips away the usual left-wing or right-wing talking points we always hear on the news.
Yeah, this isn't about partisan debates.
No. Today, we are not looking at politics. We are not endorsing a particular political platform on criminal justice. We are just looking under the hood of the machine to see how the gears actually turn, just impartially reporting on the mechanics.
And that mechanical lens is crucial, honestly. If we want to understand this essay, we have to stop looking at the justice system as a series of isolated, separate events.
Like how we usually view an arrest as one thing, a bond hearing as another.
Right, and a trial is something else entirely. But the text asks us to look at it the exact same way a defendant experiences it.
Which is as one giant, interconnected, continuous machine.
Exactly, the whole machine.
Let's start with the gap between the illusion of the paperwork and the reality of that machine. The author kicks things off by invoking the 14th Amendment.
Which is the bedrock of all this.
Right. It says that no state may deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person equal protection of the laws.
And the author makes a really sharp point here, that language is a constitutional command. It's not just a decorative slogan.
But the system often measures whether that command was followed by simply checking procedural boxes, doesn't it?
It does. Consider the mechanics of an appellate review. When a higher court looks at a case to see if someone's rights were violated, they're generally just looking at a file. They're looking at the docket.
They aren't re-interviewing witnesses.
No, they ask things like, was a lawyer named on the record? Was a plea form signed and dated? Did the final sentence fall within the legal statutory range?
And if the answers are yes, the docket looks complete.
Right. The machine generated the correct paperwork, so they stamp it and move on.
The essay calls this a procedural skeleton. It records the bones of what happened. Like, it proves the hearing took place on a Tuesday at 9 a.m.
Yeah. But it completely ignores the flesh and blood. It ignores the crushing, unequal pressures that actually forced that outcome in the first place.
Exactly. A docket might say, plea entered voluntarily, but it does not record that the person was terrified of losing their housing.
Or that they were isolated from their family in a cell.
Right. Or represented by an attorney who is juggling 300 other cases that month.
The record proves that something happened procedurally. It does not prove that justice happened morally. The system just treats the completed paperwork as empirical proof of equal protection.
It makes me think of buying a used car based entirely on a paperwork checklist.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Imagine you are buying a car and the dealer hands you an inspection form. It says, steering wheel present, yes. Engine present, yes. Brakes installed, yes.
Sounds great on paper.
Yeah, you look at the checklist and you think, great, this is a fully functioning vehicle. It is equal to any other car on the road.
Sure.
But then you actually get in and you realize the steering wheel isn't connected to the axle. The engine is missing 2 cylinders. And the brakes are literally made out of cardboard.
Oh, man. But if an auditor came by and looked only at the checklist, they would declare that the car passes inspection.
Flawlessly. The paperwork is perfect. But the machinery is fundamentally broken. It cannot safely transport you anywhere.
And what the author is arguing is that our legal system is obsessed with the checklist and entirely blind to the cardboard brakes.
Which is terrifying. And the reason the system gets away with this relies on a concept the author calls divided responsibility.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture of government structure,
Right.
divided responsibility is basically how the state insulates itself from the holistic inequality of the machine.
Like passing the buck.
Exactly. The state divides itself into fragmented pieces, so no single department has to own the final broken result.
I want to trace a case from start to finish just to see how this divided responsibility actually plays out on the ground. Let's say someone gets arrested. How does the state divide itself?
Okay, well, first the legislature writes the penal code and sets the funding for public defense. Then the police make the arrest based on that code.
Okay, 2 different branches already.
Right. Then the prosecutor's office independently selects the charges. A totally different actor, the judge, sets the bond. The county sheriff runs the jail that houses the person.
And none of them talk to each other about the overall fairness.
No. And then the underfunded public defender's office provides the lawyer. The clerk of courts manages the files and the access fees. So when this fragmented system produces a wildly unequal outcome, when the person with cardboard brakes crashes, everyone in that chain just points the finger at someone else.
It is the ultimate not my job scenario. The legislature says, we just write the laws, we don't selectively enforce them.
Right. The prosecutor says, I just charge the cases based on the statutes. I don't set the bond amount.
And the judge says, I just apply the law and set the bond. I don't control the county budget for public defenders.
Yeah, and the jail says, we just hold the people the judge remands to us. Everyone has plausible deniability.
And this is crucial. The defendant doesn't experience the system as a bunch of separate, compartmentalized offices, do they?
Not at all. To the person standing in front of the judge wearing a jumpsuit, they are facing the state, capital S. They are facing the combined, unified force of the entire machine.
Right. If every single office in that chain contributes just one little unequal piece, like an underfunded lawyer here, a harsh bond policy there, a crowded jail cell over there, the final compounded result is massively unequal protection.
And the essay's core philosophy is that equal protection must be a whole machine principle. Meaning, if the right to counsel is supposed to be a defensive shield, but one guy gets a massive steel shield and the other guy gets a paper plate, you can't say they're equally protected just because you handed them both an object and called it a shield.
Wow. Yeah, equal protection means the entire defensive architecture must protect equally. Or the phrase just becomes a box to check.
Exactly. And this systemic fragmentation gets even more complicated when we look at the physical map of the country.
Oh, right. The geography.
Yes, the machine doesn't just act differently based on the individuals processing the paperwork. It acts completely differently based on where the machine is geographically located.
Which is a perfect pivot because we have the same constitution, right? But entirely different realities on the ground. When I was reading the sources, the data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission really jumped out at me.
It's eye-opening.
It is. The author points out that America does not operate one single criminal justice system. It operates thousands of localized punishment machines under one constitutional flag.
The variations are staggering. State laws vary, county practices vary, prosecutorial cultures, judicial philosophies, public defense funding, jail conditions, all of it shifts wildly depending on your geographic coordinates at the time of arrest.
Let's dig into that U.S. Sentencing Commission report, because you might think, okay, state laws are different, but the federal system must be unified. The federal system is supposed to be the gold standard of standardization, right?
That is the assumption, but the Commission's findings totally dismantle that. They looked at the federal system and found persistent variations in sentencing practices, not just between different federal districts across the country.
Which would be bad enough on its own.
Right. But they found these massive variations within the exact same courthouse, depending entirely on which judge was assigned to the case.
Wait, literally. So courtroom A and courtroom B located down the hall from each other.
Yes, down the hall from each other. Operating under the exact same federal statutes, looking at the exact same conduct, and producing completely different sentences.
That is wild. So one judge might routinely give, say, probation for a specific white-collar crime, while the judge next door routinely gives 5 years in federal prison.
Exactly. Same courthouse, different judge, vastly different outcome. And if that kind of massive variation exists inside the highly structured federal system, you can imagine how fragmented the state-by-state and county-by-county reality is.
It must be chaos.
It is. You have the same nation, the same constitutional promise of equal protection, and the same accusation. But crossing a county line means stepping into a completely different life.
Okay, I can hear you listening and pushing back on this right now. You are probably thinking, isn't that exactly how federalism is supposed to work?
It's a common defense.
Right. Like, isn't the whole point of the United States that different states and local governments get to pass different laws and reflect their local community values? How does the author reconcile the foundational idea of federalism with this claim of unequal protection?
The author actually anticipates that exact defense, and the counterargument is very precise. Federalism explains the variation. It does not justify it morally under a national constitution that explicitly promises equal protection to all persons.
Explanation is not justification.
Precisely. The state can argue that different states are legally allowed to write different laws. And under current constitutional doctrine, that is entirely true. But the moral and architectural contradiction remains completely unresolved.
Because the outcomes are so skewed.
Right. If two people commit the exact same act, but because one is 5 miles across a county line, they face a minor penalty and a diversion program, while the other faces a massive prison sentence, strict parole rules, and a harsh bond culture. They are not standing before the same protective machine.
Yeah, one person gets the titanium bridge and the other gets the rusted scrap metal bridge, simply because of a zip code. The law is supposed to judge the facts of the case, the actual conduct. It is not supposed to judge the geographic coordinates of the arrest.
Exactly. And this geographic lottery is supercharged by the very first real human gear that the accused encounters in the machine, the prosecutor.
Which brings us to a huge part of the problem.
Huge. The prosecutor is arguably the most powerful actor in the entire system. And the data from the Vera Institute of Justice highlights how prosecutorial discretion shapes outcomes long before a trial is even a possibility.
I think the general public just imagines that the law itself dictates the charge. Like, if you steal a TV, the law says you are charged with TV stealing, and that's the end of it. A computer could do it.
Right, like an automated vending machine?
Yeah, but that's not how it works at all, is it?
Not in the slightest. Prosecutors choose among a massive menu of statutes, enhancements, counts, and potential dismissals. They have almost unchecked authority to decide what the official story of the crime will be.
Unchecked authority.
Pretty much. And equal protection cannot exist if one person's facts are charged as a sledgehammer to crush them, and another person's identical facts are charged as a gentle negotiation.
When I was reading the section on how they use that sledgehammer, the concept of charge stacking really stood out. How does a prosecutor actually stack charges on the ground to build what the essay calls a sentencing cliff.
Charge stacking is basically the process of turning discretion into pure leverage. Let's say a defendant is accused of a single event, maybe a robbery.
Okay.
The prosecutor doesn't just charge them with one count of robbery. They comb through the penal code and pile on multiple counts for that single event.
Just piling it on.
Yeah. They charge the robbery, plus assault, plus a weapons enhancement, plus a geographic enhancement because it happened near a school, and then they threaten to classify the person as a habitual offender.
Wow. So they engineer the mathematical exposure to be astronomically high?
They build a sentencing cliff. They make the potential prison time so high, say 50 or 60 years, that the defendant is absolutely terrified.
Naturally.
And then the prosecutor slides a piece of paper across the table and says, plead guilty to this one single charge right now, and I'll drop all the enhancements, and you only do 3 years.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply unsettling. The essay calls this survival bargaining.
It's a great term for it.
It is, because the choice the defendant is making at that table isn't a free constitutional decision about whether they are actually guilty or whether the state can actually prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. It is a choice between taking a massive plea discount and facing total apocalyptic destruction of their life.
And to understand how deeply embedded this is in our legal architecture, we have to look at a pivotal Supreme Court case from 1978. It's called Bordenkircher v. Hayes.
Oh, this case blew my mind.
It perfectly illustrates survival bargaining. So the defendant, Paul Hayes, was accused of forging a check for $88.30.
Wait, let me just repeat that. $88.
$88.30. Okay.
That's practically nothing.
Right. So the prosecutor offered him a 5-year sentence if he pled guilty. But the prosecutor also told Hayes, if you don't take this plea and you insist on exercising your right to go to trial, I am going to re-indict you under the state's Habitual Criminal Act. And because you have prior convictions, you will get a mandatory life sentence.
A mandatory life sentence over an $88 forged check, simply because he wanted to go to trial.
Yes. And Hayes refused the plea. He exercised his constitutional right to a trial.
As is his right.
Exactly. But he was convicted, and true to his word, the prosecutor used the habitual offender law. Hayes was sentenced to life in prison.
Over $88.
Yes. So he appealed this all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that this was incredibly vindictive. He argued that the prosecutor was punishing him for exercising his constitutional right to a trial.
What was the Supreme Court's logic? How did they possibly justify that?
In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that this is perfectly constitutional. The court explicitly allowed a prosecutor to threaten enhanced treatment if a defendant refused a plea.
Wait, they said it was okay to threaten him like that.
They did. The logic was that as long as the prosecutor has probable cause to bring the heavier charges, they can use them as bargaining chips. The court essentially said that plea bargaining is a mutual system, and this kind of hardball negotiation is just part of the process.
So the Supreme Court is saying that the state can use the threat of a life sentence to create mind-bending bargaining pressure, and then when the defendant finally surrenders and takes the plea, the system just checks the box and calls it voluntary.
That's exactly how it works. Now, the dissenting justices in that case pointed out exactly what the author of our text argues. This isn't a free choice. It is coercion backed by the overwhelming power of the state.
Which brings us to the concept of the trial penalty.
Right.
We all learn in school that we have a constitutional right to a trial by a jury of our peers. But in this machine, the system mathematically punishes the exercise of that right.
The plea bargain becomes the expected discount, and the trial becomes the ultimate danger. If you go to trial, you are penalized not just for the crime, but for making the state prove it.
The constitutional right to a trial has ironically become a massive radioactive risk. This raises a profound question for you listening. Is a right actually a right if exercising it could completely ruin your life?
It's a paradox.
It is.
Yeah.
If you have the quote-unquote right to free speech, but speaking your mind means you get hit with a 50-year prison sentence instead of a 3-year sentence, do you really have that right in any meaningful sense?
Oh, you don't.
It's like having the right to jump out of an airplane, but you have to pay $5 million for the parachute. Sure, you have the fundamental right to jump, but practically speaking, you are staying in your seat on the plane.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. And this immense pressure to plead guilty, it isn't just abstract legal threats on a piece of paper, is it?
No, it is highly physical. That pressure is applied in a concrete room.
Yeah.
We have to talk about pretrial detention and the bond system. The essay makes a striking claim here. Bond makes equal protection conditional on wealth. It is one of the clearest examples of protection for sale in the American legal system.
Protection for sale. Because if you have money, you fight your case from your living room. If you're poor, you fight it from a cage.
Exactly. A person with financial resources can post bail and go home. They sleep in their own bed. They maintain their diet and health. They can speak with their family freely.
They can keep their job.
Right. Maintain their housing. And most importantly, they can actively help their lawyer build a defense. Their mind is clear, and they have the stamina to wait out a long legal process.
And what happens to the person who can't afford the bond?
The poor person is locked in a county jail before they have ever been convicted of anything. To understand the sheer scale of this, we need to look at the data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics.
Okay, let's hear it.
At mid-year 2024, they reported that 69% of the local jail population in America was unconvicted.
Wait, I need to make sure I'm wrapping my head around the gravity of that number. 69%.
69%.
Nearly 7 out of every 10 people sitting in local county jails across the country have not been found guilty of the crime they are currently locked up for.
That is correct. They are legally innocent, awaiting court action. They are in jail simply because they cannot afford to buy their pretrial freedom.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, because the system has a built-in defense for this too. The system calls bond a neutral appearance mechanism.
Sure, that's the official line.
It's pitched as just a financial deposit to make sure you show up to your court date. It isn't meant to be punishment. So how does the author and the research prove that bond is actually an active mechanism of inequality and not just an administrative tool?
To answer that, we turn to the methodologies and data from the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, and the Vera Institute. They don't just look at who is in jail. They study the downstream effects of pretrial detention on the actual legal outcomes.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. They track thousands of cases, comparing defendants with similar charges and backgrounds where one made bail and the other didn't.
What do they find when they compare those paths?
They find that being held in jail before trial significantly increases the probability of conviction.
Seriously?
Yes. And it does this primarily by driving up the rate of guilty pleas. Pre-trial detention also leads to longer sentences and higher recidivism rates down the road.
So the physical environment itself coercing the legal outcome, jail is actively generating guilty pleas.
Jail is not a neutral waiting room. The cage fundamentally alters the trajectory of the case. Just think about the mechanics of being held in a local county jail. You can't sleep because the lights are always on.
Right. Doors are slamming everywhere.
It's a high-stress, dangerous environment. Within a week, you lose your job because you didn't show up. If you lose your job, you might lose your apartment.
You might lose custody of your children.
Exactly. You can't gather evidence or track down witnesses for your defense because you only get 15-minute phone calls, and those calls cost exorbitant amounts of money. You are completely isolated.
Your entire life is actively collapsing around you while you wait for a trial that might be a year or more away. The structural load is crushing you.
And right at the moment when you are most desperate, the prosecutor comes to you and says, "Look, I know you maintain your innocence. I know you want to fight this. But if you plead guilty to this lesser charge right now, I will offer you time served, and you can walk out those doors today."
Survival bargaining again. But this time, with the added weight of physical confinement, you plead not because the facts were fairly tested in a neutral courtroom environment, but because physical release and damage control become far more urgent than the truth.
The paper the judge signs will say voluntary plea, satisfying the procedural checklist.
Yeah.
But the physical architecture of the jail, the threat of losing everything, was what actually coerced the signature.
Oh. So if you are broke, you are sitting in a cage, your life is falling apart, and you are facing a prosecutor who has stacked a massive sentencing cliff against you, your only lifeline, your absolute last line of defense is your lawyer. But as the text shows, even that lifeline is structurally unequal.
This brings us to the tension between minimum representation and equal protection. We have to look at the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees the right to the assistance of counsel for your defense.
Tell me the story of how that right actually became a reality for people who couldn't afford it. Because it wasn't always guaranteed, was it?
No, it wasn't. The right to appointed counsel for indigent defendants in state courts was established in a famous 1963 Supreme Court case called Gideon v. Wainwright.
Okay, Gideon.
Yeah. Clarence Earl Gideon was an impoverished man accused of breaking into a pool room. He asked the judge for a lawyer, and the judge said no, because Florida law only appointed lawyers for capital cases.
So what did he do?
Gideon had to defend himself, and he did poorly. He was convicted.
But he didn't give up.
No. From his prison cell, using prison stationery, Gideon handwrote a petition to the Supreme Court, arguing that a fair trial is impossible without a lawyer.
That's incredible.
It is. And the Supreme Court agreed with him. They ruled unanimously that states must provide counsel to defendants who cannot afford one. It was a massive victory for civil rights.
A huge turning point.
Later, in another case called Strickland v. Washington, the court established that this counsel must be effective, not just a warm body in the room. They created a two-pronged test to see if a lawyer's performance was so deficient that it deprived the defendant of a fair trial.
That sounds like a beautiful architectural blueprint for justice, doesn't it? But the author argues that this constitutional right is filtered through local budgets, which totally warps the blueprint.
The delivery of this right is radically uneven. When we look at the American Bar Association's National Public Defense Workload Study, it highlights a widespread systemic crisis.
What did the ABA find?
Well, the ABA has established guidelines for how many hours different types of cases require for adequate defense. A felony might require 40 hours of work, a misdemeanor might require 10. But when they look at the actual workloads, public defenders are carrying caseloads that make those guidelines mathematically impossible to meet.
Yeah, and the essay is very careful to point out, and we should be too, that public defenders are often brilliant. They are courageous, deeply committed, and frequently way more experienced in criminal court than expensive private lawyers. The flaw is not the lawyers themselves.
No, the flaw is the structure that deliberately overloads them. The ABA study emphasizes that a brilliant lawyer who has absolutely no time, no budget for investigators, no money for expert witnesses, and an impossible volume of cases cannot provide the same defensive architecture as a wealthy defendant's private team.
Because private defense operates in a market.
Right. Public defense operates under a politically constrained budget.
It makes me think of an architectural defense. Imagine you are accused of a serious crime and you are incredibly wealthy. You don't just hire a lawyer, you hire an entire construction firm.
Oh, absolutely.
You hire multiple lead attorneys, forensic experts, DNA specialists, mitigation experts to research your entire life story, private investigators to go knock on doors and find alternative suspects, plus appellate counsel to sit in the courtroom just to watch for errors. You buy an impenetrable fortress.
And if you are poor?
If you are poor, the state provides you with one highly skilled, deeply dedicated architect. But that architect is given absolutely no bricks, no mortar, no construction crew, and they are told, you have 5 minutes to build a wall to protect this client before we move on to the next one of your 200 cases.
It is a perfect analogy. The court looks at both of these people, the guy with the titanium fortress and the guy with the exhausted architect, and checks the box, calling them both represented.
But the author asks the deeper question, protected equally how?
Exactly. If counsel is the shield placed between the citizen and the power of the state, and the rich can buy a massive titanium shield while the poor get a paper plate, then protection isn't equal. It is priced.
Priced protection.
Yes. Now, the Supreme Court doctrine here is fascinating. The court has explicitly said that equal protection does not require absolute mathematical equality in every respect. The law allows wealthy people to use their resources to retain their counsel of choice.
So the Supreme Court is legally okay with the fortress versus the paper plate?
Under current doctrine, yes. But the author's profound critique is this. If the state admits, as they did in Gideon, that having a lawyer is absolutely essential for a fair trial, and the system allows the wealthy to buy vastly more lawyering, then fairness explicitly scales with wealth.
Wow.
The system provides a constitutional floor, a minimum baseline of representation, and masquerades it as equal protection.
A constitutional floor masquerading as equal protection. That is a heavy realization. And while the lawyers, whether they are from the expensive firm or the overloaded public defender's office, are fighting it out, they are doing so in front of people who are also shaped by the machine, the human gears.
Yes, we have to look at judges, clerks, and the political climate. Because judges and clerks are not abstract, perfect algorithms dispensing pure logic.
They are just people.
Exactly. They are human beings operating inside local political systems, election cycles, and labyrinthine bureaucratic structures.
When I was looking at the research from the Brennan Center for Justice, the data tying judicial re-election pressures directly to harsher criminal sentencing was staggering.
In many states, judges are elected officials. They have to run campaigns, raise money, and secure votes.
Just like politicians.
Right. And the Brennan Center describes how campaign season physically alters the neutrality of the courtroom. Soft on crime attack ads and tough on crime campaign messaging create an environment of fear.
which totally makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Yes. If punishment becomes campaign language, the defendant standing in front of the judge ceases to be just a citizen. They become political material.
Think about the mechanics of that. A judge might be looking at a borderline case where probation and rehab might be the most effective, appropriate sentence.
Sure, happens all the time.
But the judge knows that if they grant probation and that person reoffends, their opponent in the next election is going to run a massive TV ad with ominous music saying, "Judge Smith lets violent criminals back on the street."
And the essay points out that the judge may not consciously intend to be unfair. They aren't sitting on the bench maliciously twisting their mustache.
Right.
But they are operating in an environment that actively rewards severity and politically discourages leniency. They fear the headlines.
A listener could push back here and say, but wait, the system's whole defense is that judges swear an oath to be impartial. How does the author address the argument that judges are just applying the law as it is written?
The author addresses this by arguing that equal protection requires a neutral machine, not just neutral language on a page.
Interesting.
If a judge has a human reaction to a defendant's family reputation in a small town, or their obvious poverty, or the local stigma attached to them, the machine is seeing far more than just the facts of the case.
Because it's being filtered through human bias and political pressure.
Right. The law should judge the facts, not whether the defendant belongs to the local network of respectability or whether leniency will cost the judge an election.
And it isn't just the judges. We also have to look at the administrative barriers, the clerks, the bureaucracy of justice. This is the invisible wall that nobody talks about.
It is a subtle but massive point in the essay. The clerk system controls the entire paper trail. Notices, filings, docket entries, fee schedules, access to transcripts.
All the boring stuff that actually dictates your life.
Exactly. For a wealthy person, this maze is easily navigated. Their lawyers and paralegals gather all the records, pay the fees without blinking, and handle the bureaucracy.
But for a poor person who is trying to understand what happened to them.
For a poor person, even knowing what document to ask for is a massive barrier. The system might say, the record is public, anyone can look at it.
Right, technically public.
Technically. But then they price access to transcripts at $3 a page and require certified copies that cost extra and make the procedural navigation so complex that understanding your own case becomes nearly impossible without legal training.
It's like a paywall for justice.
It is. Equal protection is completely weakened when the path to simply understanding your own life requires money and literacy that you do not possess.
So let's take a step back and look at what we've built so far. We have a machine where protection is fragmented by geography. It's conditioned on your wealth through the bond system. It's distorted by prosecutorial leverage and charge stacking. It is rationed by how much money your public defender is allotted and politicized by judicial elections. It feels overwhelming. But we are now pivoting to arguably the essay's most profound and challenging contradiction. It's about how the machine eats its own history, the record multiplier.
We are talking about recidivist sentencing and habitual offender structures. This is when the system punishes someone more harshly for a new crime because they have a prior criminal record.
Which is very common.
Very. And legally, the Supreme Court has upheld this time and time again.
You mentioned some cases earlier, Almendarez-Torres, Ewing v. California. Walk me through Ewing, because I think that perfectly illustrates what we're talking about.
Ewing v. California is a monumental case from 2003 regarding California's three strikes law. Gary Ewing walked into a golf pro shop and stole 3 golf clubs, worth about $399 piece.
Okay, so around $1,200 total.
Right. He slipped them down his pant leg and tried to walk out.
Yeah.
Grand theft. Now, normally, that might be a relatively minor felony, maybe resulting in a short sentence or probation. But Ewing had a prior criminal record. He had 4 prior serious or violent felony convictions.
So the prosecutor invoked the 3 strikes law?
Yes. Because of his prior record, the theft of 3 golf clubs triggered the 3 strikes law, and Gary Ewing was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
25 years to life for golf clubs?
Yes. He appealed, arguing that 25 years to life for stealing golf clubs was grossly disproportionate and violated the 8th Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment.
And what did the Supreme Court say?
In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court upheld the sentence. They ruled that the state has a legitimate interest in dealing more harshly with repeat offenders. The court treats the fact of a prior conviction as a special doctrinal category that allows the state to dramatically enhance a sentence. The punishment wasn't just for the golf clubs. It was for the golf clubs. Plus, the fact that Ewing had failed to learn his lesson from past convictions.
This is where I think you listening might be shouting at your speakers. Because the immediate visceral reaction to this is, well, obviously. The state says repeat offenders are a bigger danger to public safety. They haven't learned their lesson, so obviously they should be punished more.
Right. Doesn't equal protection allow us to punish a repeat behavior more harshly? It is the most natural objection. It feels intuitive.
It does.
But let's unpack the author's calm structural rebuttal to this. The author introduces a concept called the first offense equality rule. The argument is that equal protection means the same present charge should begin with the exact same legal weight for every citizen.
Meaning?
Every new charge should be processed regarding the statutory range and the charge structure as if it were a first offense.
So you're saying the state should prosecute the act, not enhance the person's status.
Exactly. When you enhance the sentence structure based on a past record, you are no longer treating the present offense equally. You are creating two different versions of the exact same crime.
Oh, I see.
The law is no longer asking what happened this time. It is asking, who has the state already labeled this person to be?
You are creating a legally inferior caste of citizens.
The state is not adjudicating the present act. It is adjudicating the person through their status. Equal protection cannot mean that one person defends against the charge of stealing golf clubs, while another person defends against the charge of stealing golf clubs and the heavily weighted category of being a habitual offender.
Because it changes the entire architecture we've been talking about. If you face an enhanced range because of your record, your bond posture changes. The judge sees you as a bigger risk, so your bond is higher.
Right.
The prosecutor's plea leverage skyrockets because now they can threaten you with 25 to life instead of 2 years. The trial exposure is suddenly massive. You are abandoned at the starting line of equal protection before the facts of the new case are even tested.
And this leads to what is, without a doubt, the most devastating mathematical point in the entire text, the record multiplier.
When I read the part about the record multiplier, it blew my mind because it implies that the machine isn't just ignoring its past mistakes, it is actively weaponizing them. Explain how this loop actually works.
Think about everything we have discussed for the last hour. The overloaded public defenders given 5 minutes to build a wall, the survival bargaining against a massive sentencing cliff, the crushing pressure of pretrial detention in local jails where you are losing your job and your mind.
All of it.
What if the defendant's prior records, the very record that the state is now using to justify locking them up for 25 years to life, was produced by that exact same unequal machine?
Oh, wow. So you are saying, what if their first conviction 10 years ago wasn't the result of a fair Titanium Bridge trial?
What if it was driven by an overworked lawyer? What if that first conviction only happened because they were sitting in a filthy jail cell, terrified, and they took a plea deal just to get out and save their apartment?
And now, 10 years later, the state points to that paper docket from a decade ago, which looks perfect on the procedural checklist, and says, see, you are a habitual criminal. We are going to multiply your punishment today based on this record.
The inequality compounds itself through law. The state manufactures a record through unequal protection, through poverty, through leverage, through underfunded defense, and then uses that very record as empirical fuel to justify processing the person even more harshly the second time.
It's a self-feeding loop.
The machine multiplies its own prior unequal outcomes and calls the multiplication justice.
It's like compound interest, but for systemic disadvantage. You get processed unequally once, and it mathematically guarantees you will be processed even more unequally the next time, because now you have a label. The blueprint of the machine requires that past failure.
And the system's favorite trick is to treat a prior record as the absolute end of the conversation. You have a record, therefore you get an enhanced sentence.
But the author flips that.
The author demands that under equal protection, the record must become the beginning of the question. How was that record produced? Did they have equal defensive power, or was it the product of a paper plate defense and a concrete cage?
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have essentially walked through the entire blueprint of the whole machine. Let's recap this journey.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We've seen how constitutional protection is not a single, solid titanium guarantee, but a fragmented reality. It is fragmented by geography down to the specific courtroom you are standing in.
Right.
It is conditioned by bond, meaning your wealth dictates your physical freedom and mental clarity before a trial even begins. It is completely distorted by prosecutorial leverage and charge stacking that turns the constitutional right to trial into a terrifying risk.
Absolutely.
It is rationed by underfunded public defense budgets. It is politicized by judicial elections and campaign rhetoric. And finally, it is weaponized by prior records through this compounding record multiplier.
It is a sweeping structural critique. And I want to remind you listening why this matters so deeply, regardless of your personal background or your views on crime.
Yeah, why should someone who isn't in the system care?
Because you might believe deeply in personal responsibility. The author explicitly states that they believe in personal responsibility too. But the crucial takeaway from this deep dive is that personal responsibility and unequal justice can exist at the exact same time.
Two things can be true. A person can be flawed and the system can be broken.
A person can have made terrible mistakes. A person can be completely guilty of a crime and still deserve meaningful, well-resourced counsel. They can still have been denied equal process.
Right.
A society cannot claim to be fair or claim to be operating under the rule of law if its very definition of fairness scales and changes based on the wealth, the zip code, and the prior status of the accused.
If the bridge collapses because we used rusted scrap metal, it doesn't matter how perfect the blueprint was in the engineer's office. Equal protection must mean equal protection from the overwhelming power of the system, not just formal checklist access to it.
That is the gap between the illusion of the paperwork and the reality of the machine.
And so I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something that builds on everything we've explored in this text.
Okay, what is it?
If we accept the author's premise that the entire machinery of justice is structurally unequal, and if we accept that the system relies on this compounding record multiplier to secure its outcomes, does an unequal process inherently corrupt the moral weight of a guilty verdict?
That is the ultimate unsettling question.
If we deny people actual physical equal protection, if we rely on survival bargaining and wealth-based cages and overloaded defenders with 5 minutes to spare, do we as a society rob ourselves of the certainty that justice was actually served? Do we leave ourselves with nothing more than the illusion of completed paperwork, a flawless checklist that says the engine is there, while the car itself is completely incapable of driving toward justice? Think about that the next time you hear the phrase equal protection. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.